2022. On May 23rd, I've asked Kate to volunteer to be the secretary. I just immediately want to pass the meeting over to Dr. Casamara and John Spang. But before I do that, I just want to reiterate what I said last night. I think the work that went into this, the team that worked with Kara, the amount of legwork that John had to do with this with Mike was absolutely incredible and mind-boggling. And congratulations to all of you for putting this thing together. So with that, I'll leave it up to you to start, and we can go from there.
Sure. No, and I echo your sentiment, and thank you very much. The team has worked extensively hard on this. This has been nonstop. I would even go as far as to say that a lot of the work even started well before the actual physical act of putting a list together. I think that preparing early on in the winter for what was to come for next year and this year helped to create pockets in our budget that allowed us to save a lot of staff members as well. So I think the plan to kind of land the plane, and I said this the other night, but to land the plane effectively this year financially also benefited us in terms of how we were going to handle our 24-25 budget. The extra $7 million at the end didn't hurt either, so that was great. But John has done a lot of work on putting all the puzzle pieces together as a way to articulate and explain where we stand now at this point. So I'll turn it over to John.
Thank you, and thank you, Rich. So what you're going to see tonight are a lot of numbers, and if you know me, whenever there are a lot of numbers on a page, they really don't stand by themselves. You need what I call a walkthrough. So I'll be describing really what they are, the columns and the rows, and it should begin to come to life. But before I do, and there it is, I like the phrase puzzle. I think there's some big stories that emerge, and particularly what you're about to see, I believe, is how we've landed off the fiscal cliff. If you remember back in January, the message we said to you was, our COVID money is ending, we're going to need $11 million just to keep what we're doing, and this is how the story is finished. And well, what you'll see in a few minutes is there really are two big pieces of state aid that we weren't aware of back in January that now we are. One is an increase in the Alliance grant. It brings in $6.8 million for us next year. And the second is it's called municipal revenue sharing. That's the $12 million we've heard about. Early indications are we would get $7 million of that for the board's budget. But back to the Alliance grant, as everybody knows, that's the great equalizer. That's what the state tries to provide. They try and close the gap between the haves and the have-nots with the Alliance grant. But what they look for is strategies that will dramatically increase student outcomes. And they might close achievement gaps, but they're to pursue bold initiatives. That's the whole point of it. And we have a strategy that'll do this. We call it the Academy Model. And as you know, in the fall, the Academy Model will be well underway at the high school, particularly for 9th and 10th graders, even though we're not moving into the new building for a year. And what you're going to see is we propose moving the salaries for 58 teachers who will be teaching the Academy Model in the fall into the Alliance grant as a strategy. And I think the reason I really like this move is because if you remember when we were at the ad hoc committee presenting, and one of the things they asked for was a 3-year budget. And if you remember seeing that middle year had a big jump and the third year was lower. But it was because of the move into cars. And we, I think, showed something like $12 million or so for cars. And what this does is if we take almost 6 million of, call them academy teachers, put them into the Alliance grant, then that jump that we have to take in the next budget is cut in half. And I think that makes a big difference. As we use the Alliance grant to pay for the cost of the, half the cost of the academy. And to be fair, the second big piece of state aid that we now know of, and let's talk about it as if it's $7 million. That's budget stabilization aid. And it's not in any state budget for the following year, but I would maintain that's because there is no budget yet for the following year. Next year is the second and last year of a 2-year budget. So why not continue that? Anything can be put in that year. So I'm not willing to say completely that's a 1-year phenomenon. And because it's not limited just to us here in Danbury. There were a number of municipalities that got this stabilization aid. I believe we got the most of anybody. We got a very large share, but so too did some of the other places. So I think there'll be reasons to continue that. So that's just a couple comments. I think, to me, that's the kind of the bigger picture, what's going on now that wasn't there in January. So let me show you what we've done, what we proposed. Everything I put up here is going to be in front of you on the sheets. And I thought the top sheet, you're familiar with that. That's the budget that we passed in February. And if you remember, we used those yellow columns. For a while we call them the lights on budget. We said, well, ESSER's expiring, but things have been around for a while. So that middle yellow column, we said that's really our current programs and services. But what this chart did was, it showed everything that was new after that. We call them budget drivers, but you'll recognize them. To open the academy in April. We also had a proposal to bring more bilingual paras in, some multi-language learners, some supports there. You'll see some of those things in a second, but I just thought this chart would remind us, how did we get to the 181 million? That was the budget that was submitted to the mayor, submitted to the ad hoc. That's the one that's been reduced. But it's really the next page underneath that, if you flip for a
Excuse me a
second.
minute, John.
Yep.
I got a question. What is the second line where it says the dollar increases? What is?
Well, I was just adding over from the 150 million. So in column B, or the board, the city gave us 150 million. I was saying the 171 million is what we needed. The difference was 21 million. Then if you added each budget driver going across, that's what we added to bring us up to 181.
So the 31 million is the difference between
Between 181 and the 150.
the 150
Not the
and I
160.
got you. Okay,
Right.
thanks.
Okay. But if you look at the second page, the next page down underneath for a second. What this does, and that's why I showed you the first page. What this does, these show you some of the things we've removed to bring it down. And they're all grayed out. But I think what's important here is it shows you what still remains. So under the plan, we're showing you that middle driver to reopen the academy, still targeting April 1st, that money is in there. Same with some technology money. Remember that, those dollars were really for infrastructure, to replace servers, some of the switches and things like that. That remains. We think that's very important. And we also maintained the Chromebooks and teacher devices that, remember, did not make it into the city's capital budget. This was a add by the finance committee. We made it right before we added the budget. But we believe the Chromebooks we have to get on a regular replacement schedule. They're not going to last. I think if we didn't put anything in there, we'd really be kidding ourselves. So you can see those remain. And then the far two columns, that's what we're going to talk about, what I call the operating budget reductions. You've seen and heard a little bit of that already, and I've shown the additions separately. We'll show you each of those in a second. It brings it down to 167,100. That's higher than if we get 7 million added to the 160, but it's pretty close, for sure. Okay, so.
Can I ask one, Jim?
Yep.
The capital budget for the city included the roof repair for Ellsworth, but
Yeah.
that's now getting taken care of by the state. So that money, we had originally submitted for technology copiers to the city under the capital budget, but that got put by the wayside, I assume because of that roof at Ellsworth. Can we slide it in for the copiers anyway?
Well, we can make changes to this plan, sure. You know, this is just what we're
I mean,
proposing so
nothing,
far.
the Chromebooks here, but there was also the issue of copiers.
Yeah, what we think we have a good solution for the copiers, and maybe this is a good chance to talk about it. So we had, remember when we redid the ESSER grant adjustment in order to provide, ESSER grant, to provide some money to balance the budget this year? Remember, I think I called it a deficit plan or something. But as part of that was $380,000. We asked the state if we could move into copiers, and they said yes.
Oh, okay.
And what we're talking about with our copier supplier is a plan where we would use ESSER money now, get those orders, buy some, and then for a couple others we'd lease purchase, but we would not have to make a payment for the next 14 months. So we could bring in the new machines, but we wouldn't have to use this budget. This budget's
Sorry.
under enough pressure.
Yeah,
You'll see,
thank
so.
you, sorry about
Yeah.
that, I just didn't want to forget.
Right, for sure. Okay. We should probably do a memo on that for you to see. All right, so here's, if you look at the next chart, the big chart, there's a lot of things going on in the page. Up in the box, I've repeated what the city council has already approved for us, what we expect to come in at their next meeting, the 7 million. I just thought it was good to have that on the page. But I want to turn you a little bit to the right, and I want to talk about the columns under the 181 million. So that, I called it Board of Ed, that's the same number you saw on the first page. That's the, you could call it the adopted budget so far. We haven't made any changes to that. But then, if you remember the sheet I just showed up with the gray boxes, what you see right under that is the money that was there. You can trace it to the first sheet. I'm taking those out of the 181. So the high school overcrowding driver. So why are you taking that out? Well, you're going to hear from Kara in a moment as to what the plan we have to put things back in there and how we plan to do things. The improvement to add all of the paras. I think we added 60 paras or something in the plan. That comes out given the situation. The bilingual staff and the multi-language learners, the security driver, the special ed driver, those I took out simply because they were drivers, but I don't think that's a cut. I know that's not a cut we can live with, so we're gonna have to amend that with something else. But let me keep going and show you. The real meat of the change are down in these next 5 line items. And you saw a little of that so far. And I'm labeling them staffing changes and eliminations. And they were in here for you. I'm showing them in the 5 original categories that were in some of the slides that we've shown. Later, and I think as we maybe go in front of the council or anyone else, maybe the full board, we're collapsing some of these into more general terms. But I think for you, I want you to see the granular part of it. The transfers to DHS is a little complicated, but 6 of the staff members whose positions are being eliminated are being transferred into the high school. Because, that's part of the overall plan. You've heard of that. We're saving jobs. That's the #1 goal. The reason that's a budget reduction is because the positions that they're leaving behind are going away. I think there are 3 or 4 different positions for those 6 people. But as they go into the high school, the old jobs get cut, taken out of the budget. So when we eliminate those positions, $268,000 less is needed. Okay.
So John, can I
Yes.
just clarify that? The positions that they're taking in the high school, positions that were already in the budget?
No, they're gonna be in the new driver.
Okay.
You'll see in a minute. Okay, the duplicates, we did another fine, I don't know what to call it, but when we went back into the budget, line by line, we found 3 people who were budgeted twice, and 1 person was even budgeted 3 times. So.
Only getting paid once.
Yeah, we can pay once. Yeah, I'm not sure how that happened, but you don't need that, so that's an easy thing to take out, $400,000. That included their benefits. When we budgeted someone, the benefits go with it. The resignations, those are what they are. I think you've seen some of that. I'm not gonna go into that in detail, but it's primarily, we always have turnover, attrition, people leaving, and
If I could just clarify, that's,
Yep.
the resignations is kind of a big lump sum. It's resigned, retired, redundant, or eliminated positions. So it's a big bucket of staff that have retired, staff that, when they left the position, we said, we're just gonna close that up. So it's not all resignations per se, it's a big bucket of
yeah.
about 50 people or so that have either resigned, retired, or we've eliminated the position that was open.
RIF or RIF stands for reduction in force, and those are positions that we've removed. You've heard the superintendent talk about the shift in enrollment that we're experiencing. We believe there'll be fewer elementary sections next year. We won't need those. You'll find they're counted there, as well as some other really austerity measures that we have taken to live within our means. I don't know any other way to describe it, but they're positions that we're going to do without. The people who are in those have been offered other slots. So that was one of our main strategies here as we lowered it.
Excuse me, John.
Yep.
I just have a petty point. Could you just put brackets under, next to RIF is to what the acronym stands, or
Yeah,
the initial
okay.
stands for.
Yeah.
I mean, it's common to
Yeah.
your community,
I know.
but to the outside world, it
Good
could be
point.
rest in peace or something like that.
That's what I was thinking.
Okay, the family liaisons, that was a very difficult reduction to make. They're very useful, but when you have to make these decisions, that was one that we made $571,000. So those all add up to $7.5 million. So I put the subtotal up there. You can see taking the drivers out was $6 million. But then right below that, here's really the sea change, as I'll call it. The teachers who will be teaching in the academy model, they've been identified by the high school. We went in, looked at who they were, what they were earning, what their benefits were. It adds to $5.6 million. And these monies get taken out of the operating budget, and the staff continues, but they're paid out of the higher Alliance grant. It's one of the big changes, yes.
Just one step back
Yeah.
to the family liaisons. I thought that was covered under the LEAP grant?
It is. I'm gonna get to that in a second.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, some of the, when I started looking at it, it dawned on me. It seemed that over the years, as we've gotten grant money, we've added things that maybe beyond the basics. Some of the positions that we wanted to have that weren't typical classroom teachers, they were paid with grants. So as we get back to basics in classroom teachers and kids and adults in front of kids, and we say, okay, we just can't afford that anymore, it's no surprise that that's where we found the people budgeted. That's how we afforded them in the first place. But we have some ideas, that's coming up, I'll show you.
I just, can I interrupt?
Yeah,
I'd just like you to mention that the academy shift, the staff, the reduction of 5.6 mil is moving to Alliance. So therefore, later on, John will show you what came out of Alliance in order to do this. But there is a political benefit that I think we should mention here, is that this $6 million helps the city taxpayers, because
Yes.
the Alliance money is not funded by the appropriation of the taxpayers of Danbury, it's funded by the state. So I think that shows that, again, to what we're doing with this plan, in addition to saving pink slips,
Right.
also considers the consideration for the taxpayer of Danbury is to utilize our money most effectively to that. The other question somebody will ask is, we talked about, is it kosher to put this in there, but we'll say, we'll leave that up to you.
Right, so one of the things is we're gonna be working with the state to make sure that we can in fact make this move. It would be considered a bold reform initiative for sure, but it does involve existing staff. And so we have to be careful not to stay within the compliance guidelines of grants when shifting staff from general fund to the other. One could make a definite argument that if we hadn't done this, we would be losing potentially a lot of staff members, and so therefore it would qualify. But to be safe, to be sure, we'll get sort of pre-authorization from the state to make sure that this is in fact a viable move. And one way or another, and if it isn't, then we would find other staff that qualify, and we would just swap the groups out. So there's no harm in at least trying, but as a strategy, I think it would qualify, because these two groups would be also the groups, I say two groups, this teacher group would be the group that you would pick up from Danbury High School and put over on the Cardis, at the Cardis building. So it should qualify, and they're actually physically moving locations, so we'll get back to you on that, but I'm pretty sure it should fly. Sorry, John,
Can I ask
Kate has another.
Quick follow-up question to
Sure.
that, Karen. One of the conversations we had is that the Alliance funds are only going to grow through next year.
Yes.
So in terms of a long-term strategy, what's on the horizon for like, maybe we haven't gotten there yet, I'm sure, because
Yeah.
we're dealing with this, but
Right.
I'm just thinking, like, if we take a whole bunch of salaries and shift them in there,
Yeah.
as those groups bargain and the salaries increase,
Mhm.
that may not be, it may not be able to sustain those salaries.
Right, so we've carved some money out of Alliance, so through the reductions, you know, when you add up where all those reductions, where they live, where those positions live, and that was kind of the digging in work, right? So if we're reducing these 48 positions, 16 of them are in Alliance, 4 of them are in Title I, 13 are in general fund, and a few other grants. And so what you're doing is you're creating pockets, creating pockets of room in those grants with which to reprogram. And so we've created a pocket in Alliance, so that pocket is kind of still there. But in addition now, we're getting this additional infusion where it rolls up. And so we haven't outgrown the pocket. We still have some pocket after putting this group in. And John will get to that number. But at the same time, this is, in my opinion, this has got to be it. Like this is it. And because the next year we'll get a bump, like another 5 million. But we don't want to use that 5 million for staff the next year. So this really has to be sort of the floor of where we stop doing. Then we use the 5 million in programmable one-time expenses. So you can put your Chromebooks in there every year. You know, you put your other things in there. So as that number increases, I also do believe, because I'm doing a little homework on and pushing some buttons on what's going to happen to all these Alliance districts when this taps out. Are we going to get cost of living increases? You know, is there some sort of guarantee? I don't think we're expecting any large infusions, but are we at least going to keep up with inflation and things? And so there's some feedback that is going to be indeed the case, but I'll believe when I see it, and I'll feel better when I see it.
And Kate, there was a lot of discussion around this whole concept of the Alliance. John has schedules, I believe, asked him to do a reconciliation of the Alliance money. So we were very aware not to bump it up so that, you know, we would have
So you
more
have that
money.
room.
Yeah, we have wiggle room in there for the, you know, potential increases in cost. But Kara's right, I think this is the last time that we can rob Peter to pay Paul for this particular aspect
Well, that's
of it.
That's good.
I guess what I'm trying to assess is, like, if we're looking long-term, ultimately, is our goal going to be bringing those salaries back into
Yeah, you know,
the main operating budget? That's,
They can be. I mean, over time, if we continue to partner in the right way and we continue advocacy at the state level and continue to work with the city, we'll slowly dig out of this, I hope, and so that becomes less and less of an issue. But there's, it's not just the staffing, there's, the resource issue is a real one as well, where, we talked about textbooks and things that are just basic supplies that we just can't, have a hard time keeping up with here. The pandemic helped us catch up, but now we're gonna be back to scrambling again, yeah.
Thursday.
Will this be a hiring freeze then for the year?
So, we're gonna stay within our limits. The only exception would be in a case where, special education, as always, and then, of course, enrollment. So we usually have to, if we get a surge, or if, one of the elementary schools goes, way over. We're usually pretty good at distributing students across schools. We'll have sister school arrangements, so one school fills up, we'll bus them. But then sometimes the busing, again, you have to add another bus, $70,000 for the bus. So generally, those are the only ads we would make, is if they were driven by no other choice kind of ads, but yes. Yeah.
And Kate, to your point, if you extended out linear the lines, knowing it's going to be capped and fixed, at some point in time, to your point, we may have to adjust some of the costs that become extra in the alliance because there's no funding back into someplace else. But that's a little bit down the road. I think right now we have to deal with what we're faced with now, and like always, hope for the best, and going forward. Yeah.
So,
Thank you.
I'm going to,
Excuse me, John,
Yeah.
excuse me, before you move on, I just saw it, and I might be out of order, but it's okay. I know we don't have guidelines on the committee, so I just want to ask the question that's on my mind, and you might talk about it later. Where are we as a board as far as requests that we put toward the city for the reserve. Was that pulled back?
So there's a $3 million ask still in front of the city council. We haven't pulled that back. I think if it were to be pulled back, that would be a board action. We haven't brought that to you. We wanted to wait through next week and take a look.
Okay.
Because if we did need some of that money, that would be at the June city council meeting. It doesn't look like we will, but if we didn't have to make the decision, why make it? Keep it for ourselves. So it may just expire.
Thank you for bringing that back to my
Yeah,
knowledge. Thank
yeah.
you, Jane.
Okay.
He said next week is so that we review the end of the May
Yeah.
financial situation,
Yeah.
so in a better position to see whether we're gonna be black or red.
On the list here in the column, the next section was just called adds to the board budget. I'm going to defer that. I just have 2 pages more I want to walk you through. They're much faster. Kara's going to talk about that. And then at the very bottom, I think you know we've had discussions with STA, a bus contractor, and it's not uncommon for a bus contractor to trade what we call a 0% increase in exchange for more years in their contract. So we have a verbal agreement to do with them. We want to bring it back to the finance committee before it comes to the board, but it would involve a new bus contract. We think they've done a good job having enough drivers. They've done a good job with safety. I don't see a reason not to right now, so we'll work that up through the board. That would mean $350,000 of increases next year. We'd wipe those out and bring them down to 0, so.
And also, Mrs. Cooper, we were going to add that to tonight's agenda, but after thinking about it, it would have made the evening too long and this was complex. So what I'm thinking is before June 18th is to have another finance meeting, because there's a half a dozen items, of which this is one of them, that I'd like to discuss independently of the financial statements.
Thank you.
Okay, so we absorb the information slowly but methodically rather than ram it into one night, which becomes overwhelming.
Okay, let's do the next page. What you'll see there, this is to your question, Kate, and as Dr. Casimiro mentioned. It just looks like a bunch of numbers, but what it is, when we began the reductions in force, as Therese was bringing up, some of those cuts were people that were in grants. And you can see exactly how much that was in that box on the right. So there was 1.6 million of those cuts were people in the Alliance grant. Now, we'll talk a second about the pocket that Dr. Casimiro was mentioning. But there were positions in the Title I grant. That's where the family liaisons were. So as you remove those, that money comes out. So people in the priority schools, the Title III, the LEAP grant. When you add those all across, 2.8 million of the 7.5 were people in grants. So here's where the work gets real important. The rest of the cuts are in that first column, 4.7 million. Some are resignations, some are reductions in force. This is where we collapse those sections, so you don't see family liaisons shown separately, but they're in one of these two. But 2.8 million came out of grants. So what we have to do, the next, if everyone agrees to this, the next piece of work will be to find positions in the school budget, and you take them out, lowers the budget, that column we just went through, and put those into these grants where the pockets, I like that word, have just been created.
It takes the burden off the general fund, so we're sliding them into grant eligible positions. We just have to make sure that the strategies align and the grant parameters are matched.
That's just for
That's the
this
summer
year.
work. No, that's
No.
for
Okay.
heading into next
Well,
year.
Yeah.
heading
Yes.
into next year's budget, that's
Yes.
what we're gonna do.
Yes, so as these
Okay.
grants open back up for 24, 25, so right now we're at the tail end of closing out the fiscal year. But as these open up, that's where we'll work during the summer to identify the staff, identify the strategy, the appropriateness of the shift. And then again, that will open up the general fund, relieve the general fund of those numbers.
And the continuity of the funding in these grants with this amount, where
They should
possible.
stay, yeah, they should stay from time to time. Look, obviously, we know Alliance is increasing.
Yeah.
Title I is it fluctuates a little bit, but it's not,
But
nothing.
enough to cover.
It'll
what
be
we have.
enough. We'll get at least what's there,
Mhm.
that we normally have, and if not, a tiny bit more, because our
Gotcha.
enrollment keeps going. It's when our enrollment retracts, that's, if our enrollment ever retracted, we'd have.
So,
Dr. Pescatelli?
Yes, sorry.
Do you mind if I just add a little bit about the LEAP grant? Because that is one exception to what
True.
you just shared.
Yes.
That is a grant that we had received about $500,000 initially. The projected number actually just came in this week. It'll be $273,000. It is not yet available to apply for, but that is why you saw the reduction in our family liaisons. We were able to support, close to 15 under the 500,000, and we can do about 7 under the 273. So a great resource to our district, and we are super thankful for those funds. We could always use more like we could in other grants, but that is the primary reason for the reduction that you saw there, not the effectiveness, but just the funding that that was a position that did not exist prior to COVID, and due to the COVID relief monies through the LEAP grant, we've been able to do that. So,
Thank you.
Yeah,
I just clarify,
that was
yeah,
one
I
exception.
forgot about that, yep.
Was that
Yeah.
exclusively through the LEAP grant that those positions were funded?
Exclusively through I should say, at one point in time, we had a couple that we couldn't get them all in LEAP, so we found a way to pay for, I think it's a Title I. Don't quote me on that
Yeah.
anymore. It was a couple.
Well, we had a
Title I.
lot, we started off
Yeah.
with a full complement of
Yeah.
them, then we had a couple of resignations, so we were, the number that we actually ended up with was like around 14.
Yeah.
I think we started around 20.
20.
And so we had some we had half of them, and at least half of them in LEAP, and then we had another number in Title I. So between LEAP and Title I, I think a few ended up maybe in general fund somewhere. Through the rehiring process, they get slotted in a different place. So it's a matter of going back and cherry picking where they are all at, but that money then becomes available.
And it's an unusual grant in that the spend down date is by December 31st. So it kind of runs like mid-year, you know what I mean? It runs the calendar year versus the school year. So we will carry over about $100,000 that we'll spend in the fall on payroll, and then apply for the new grant, which will go through December the following.
Okay. The reason I'm asking that is I'm looking back at the third page here, and there's a notation next to the number of liaisons for $570,000, right? Which is a little bit more than what was covered by that LEAP grant.
Oh, yeah.
If I understand.
That is correct.
So you're, if I understand correctly now, you're saying that those positions were housed mainly in the LEAP grant, but there were a few that were potentially in the general fund, and definitely some that were in Title I.
Right. And but the LEAP grant was higher initially, and now it is down. It's
We're in our third iteration of the LEAP grant. I want to say the first time we got it, off the top of my head, it was close to 7.
That's what I
then
thought.
5,
Okay.
and then
I
now
didn't
2.
realize
Yeah.
it went
And so
down.
as
It's been going down by about
Yeah.
They're
200,000.
discontinuing that program at the state level.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure actually, and the only reason why I say that, I participated in a call on Monday with the state, and they've actually reduced the fund. I think what they're trying to do is get districts up and running and ensure up practices, and then pull back. They're adding, I think it's another 20 districts, so I think it's the same pot of money that's being spread thinner. So maybe we'll still get it.
They'll all have homes though. They've been offered other paraprofessional jobs, and we have many of them who are bilingual as well, which is a huge asset. And so we have open and available ESL bilingual para positions. So they've been offered to many of them to slide over. So then it's wonderful because they've already built relationships in the district, and it's great.
I think that's what makes our budget so complex, is that we have so many, I look at it as like, when you enter Grand Central Terminal, you come in on 2 tracks, it's one out and one in. When you hit the terminal and underneath, it's 100 different tracks going in 4 or 5 different stories there. It's like our budget here, you've got so many sources of revenue that you're taking, at this particular point, part of the funding, putting it here wherever you could, manage to
Yeah,
utilize the funds.
It's extensive.
Yeah,
And,
so
the urban and alliance districts in
Yeah.
particular have to deal with, grading 50 different funding streams. And so when you have a hiccup like this,
So
the-
it's very complex. to
ungrading that,
understand, yeah.
putting it back together is.
And then what happened, just to go off, when you had 700,000, we comfortably funded at least one liaison for each building. When we went down to 5, we're like, we can piecemeal this together. Now you're down to mid twos, and you need to make the reductions, otherwise you're gonna have to pay out of general funds, which we just don't have at this point in time.
I'm gonna do one more page and then
Thank you.
turn it over to the superintendent, but it's the Alliance reconciliation. Rich, I don't know if I said to you, but Rich thought this would be a good idea to do it, and I found it very useful after I did it. I mentioned it to Dr. Casimiro. So, quickly, what you see in blue is what's going on this year. It's a $22.5 million grant. I broke it down into 3 categories, using your label, Rich, uses of funds. This is what we're paying now in salaries, benefits, and programs and services. That's an important number to keep in mind. I'll show you in a second. Those are all the other things. Power School is in there, there's technology. So many initiatives and improvements are in there. It's great. And then what I show is how that entire grant is going up by 7 million next year. It's different from the 6.8 you heard me talk about. We'll see that in a second. So what the state is approving for next year is down at the bottom there, 29,562,835. So if you go over to the yellow and you say, well, how are you going to spend that with all of these moving parts, these trains coming into the station? You could see that the very first thing is really adding more capacity, Kara's term, adding a pocket. Remember the page I showed you right before? By making some cuts, there's 1.6 million of capacity that we're gonna have that we don't have right now. So that you add into what you have. But to get the cut in the operating budget, to get that 181 down, to make those reductions, remember, to make that 7.5 million that I showed you, we have to take people out of the budget, exactly to Teresa's point, and put them into the Alliance grant. Those, we haven't identified who's there yet, but that becomes a wash as far as the grant is concerned. So I call them replacement staff. They're not replacing anybody, they're people that are here now, but they're replacing their spot in the grant. They're replacing the money, so to speak. Then what I did was I took the salaries this year and projected them up into next year. It goes up from 15 million to 16, and that's, Kate, you were saying that, we need, these monies keep going up. This shows you how much it is this year. Benefits will be higher. But look there at the programs and services. That number actually comes out more than we have this year. And that's why I found this useful, Rich, is I thought we would have less money after all of this to do things, but we have a little more than we did, so it worked out. What I also showed there, I don't want to get too off the point, the Alliance grant itself has a carve-out, I'll call it. The diversity and hiring grant itself, you have to use your Alliance money for that. They make it a separate grant. I shouldn't say have to use, it's great to have. But that's why you see me saying we're adding 7 million, but there's really only 6.8 of new money coming in, because that's spoken for. But to show everything, you need it in there. And then you can see, I could just call it the Academy, 5.6 million being used next year in the Alliance. And this is where that first point comes into play. The Alliance is going up. We're putting Academy money in. Not only does it help this year with the budget cut, but it helps with that future 3-year budget. It brings that second year down. That's again why I like it. And so you can see the bottom there adds up. But it's very different picture next year than this year. There's a lot more things going on. So I thought that was a good snapshot.
And the other point is, I don't think, at least in the history that I've been on the board, that we've ever had any type of discussion or analysis as to what went into Alliance. It was always in terms of, I was here when we first got the funding for Alliance, so if we got 500,000 that went in, and then it built up to what it is today, with monies going in and out depending on who the director was and superintendent. But this is the first attempt that we have to know what's in there. And my suggestion to John is, in the future, hopefully next year, is that in addition to the operating budget, that we have similar budget for Alliance so that it becomes something that we could monitor as well and have a handle on our funding sources. So we're getting a lot closer to understanding, what is involved in a lot of the numbers other than the operational budget. So it's good.
And we'll continue that. I mean, I think it's good for everybody to know. I think there was I think I said this at the ad hoc, that was been a kind of a pet peeve of mine, is that people really didn't understand Alliance. And so there's an assumption that it's this kind of free credit card that the district gets. And it's, in some ways, it is our credit card, but that there are parameters around what it's supposed to be used for. And, we do have a heavy operational focus.
In all
Karen's
areas.
right. Yeah.
I think it's also worth noting is to give an explanation as to globally what ECS means today, but what it did 3-4 years ago when we thought of ECS as one funding stream and Alliance as another, and then a couple of years ago, I guess they lumped everything together in terms of ECS, but basically the increases are Alliance.
Well, yes and no. So the ECS is, obviously the town share. Alliance is supposed to sit on top of that. So
Right.
it is a form of ECS,
Mhm.
but it's supposed to sit on top of. So it's supplemental to, because we are an Alliance, we are designated as an Alliance
It
district.
was much easier when it came directly to us, because
Oh, and the whole, right, so now we have to wrestle, to get our, to get the share.
that's what I was getting at,
Yeah.
is to parcel out the two
Yeah,
segments.
and I think would be highly beneficial, it's just my recommendation, that we bring in then Erica Haynes
Yeah.
from the Connecticut Finance Project to speak with the board. I think it'd be highly educational for everybody. Every time I listen to her, I learn something more. And it really helps us to formulate the voice we need to advocate for the things that we should be getting,
Mhm.
that we may or may not even know that we're entitled to. And I just think it's something that, we would want to consider in the
What's
future.
your name?
Erica Haynes,
What
from
board?
the Connecticut Finance Project.
Like she had mentioned to me in one of my conversations that
She's amazing.
it's a small amount of money, but she informed me that effective October 1st, you get the funding relative to the enrollment on that date. But then subsequently during the course of the year, there were different points at which the enrollment, let's say, increases in our case here. But there's additional funding that's applicable to that, correct? But it comes in part of the next year, but we should be entitled to get it, as part of the current year.
Yeah.
So it helps, every bit helps.
Do you want to show some of the ads now? Switch a little bit? or-
Oh, sure, I can
Okay.
speak to just the ads. So just so there's no confusion, on the first page that John showed, that was our original kind of planogram, if you will, of how we arrived at our budget numbers. And in there, you saw the DHS overcrowding, and what that was for was the enrollment numbers, the enrollment staffing that Dan would need, among other things. The instructional improvement, security, technology, MLL support staff. And so while John kind of pulled those categories out of the budget, if he showed you that on the largest page there with the red, you know, the less the drivers at the top, where it says BOE February on the right-hand side, it's not that we eliminated those, it's really that we cherry-picked and repackaged and reclassified, put positions and things from those drivers. So the entire driver themselves didn't remain. However, we did have add-ons at the bottom, so beyond the lights on budget, which we needed to handle our enrollment, and the original, for the original request, we had $3,195,000 and change there. And so what those were, and before the $7 million infusion, the anticipation of that money, we were really only able to add about 2 teachers to the high school level, which was concerning because that was not going to meet their needs. With the $7 million, and we'll talk about how that was broken up to a third, we'll get to that. We were able to fund some of the staff, not all of the staff, not fully, but a good portion of the staff will be okay up there in terms of the course request. So an ELA, 3 science teachers, a math teacher, the bilingual paras, which were part of the original request. We couldn't get him the 3 safety advocates, but we'll get him 1 additional safety advocate. The assistant for the academy, the teaching grade 5 at Ellsworth Avenue, our enrollment increased at Ellsworth. Elementary bilingual paras, there are 2 places in the district that are legally required to have bilingual para as a result of numbers and pockets that have grown. And then we have a couple of, we have a tech aide position that needed to be filled and a math position at Region Endeavor. In addition to that, we had some program changes where certification changed. So it's not really an add, it's really more of a changing of positions. So we eliminated some at the elementary, but then we replaced them here with different certifications. And then some other adjustments that we put in there were around subs, having a few extra building subs especially at the beginning of the school year. I think I reiterated a couple times that I'm a little nervous about the start of the school year and having the appropriate staffing. So we'll have some funding for building subs to make sure that our classrooms are covered and across the district as we settle into this new, into our new staffing. And then we had a little bit of funding in there for the teacher stipends that was that K-12 initiative to have some teacher leaders across K-12 in each of the buildings. So not necessarily new, other than what the board was mainly aware of in terms of the staffing needs, but cherry-picked from those columns in individual positions that we collapsed. So not the whole thing, of course, but about $3 million of that. Okay.
Restorations.
The restorations. Okay. So on the, let's get to the last page.
The very last page, yeah, the very last page.
Very last page. So we've been asked, how are you using that $7 million? And I think, we wanted to be very careful that we weren't heading into another use of a sizable amount of money to float staff that we couldn't afford the very next year. So we wanted to be very considerate about using that funding in a way that met the request of, hey, save as many jobs as you can, but also use it responsibly. And so the planned restorations, if you remember, we had some staffing that were originally on the proposed cut list. We had technology needs, and of course we have staffing needs. So this basically breaks out to not quite a pretty third, and a third, but pretty close to that. So if you look at the top third of the planned restorations, we used about 37.8% or $2.6 million to replace some of the technology and infrastructure. So that's that 785. So that's how we achieved that number, is by using the 7 million. And then the teacher devices that John referenced before, which are also part of the original driver, we're going to offset that cost with the 7 million. These are a one-time non-staffing fund. So the majority of the group is in this area of non-staffing and under the technology bucket. And so the next third, if you will, is really around the instructional improvement. And so this is how we were able to provide some of the staffing, the additional staffing that is needed at DHS. I would say it's not necessarily West Campus, but more related to the high school, so I'd probably just make that edit, John. West Campus, it's really just DHS, and that we had added about $590,000 there. There were some, John had mentioned before that we had an adjustment that was needed for the AS Magnet School, so that's kind of a one-time cost, we hope. We think that that was a good use of that. I'm sorry, the enrollment is down below, I jumped ahead of myself, John. So we had, the GSS campus is the move to, yeah, the BOE move that, over there, so I'm so sorry. And then the last one was actually the enrollment, which is the 1.3. The last third, which is 31.7% of the money, or about 2.2 million, is where we restored the position of the media specialist across the district where we originally had previously cut, along with 6 instructional coaches. So we were able to return those positions back into our staffing. We were still obviously concerned about that for the next year, just as vulnerable. But overall, we have, think that we have a plan here to address not using the entirety of the $7 million for staffing that we, for the 25-26 school year, that was going to be problematic, yes.
I understand you're also gonna cut the security head position. And can you give us a listing of the duties that came with it and who's gonna get it?
Yes, so Mike could probably speak to this best, but we're consolidating some of those roles and responsibility. Mike is gonna pick up some, and then we have a lead security safety advocate, I should say, that will pick up some. And then some of the keying and the carding and sort of technical aspects of the work will be kind of divvied up amongst several people. So I don't know if I covered everything, Mike,
Yeah,
but
that's most of it, and then there's certain things like ordering uniforms and things like that that I'll absorb, some of my team will take on.
hiring.
Yeah, hiring as well. Yeah, as we've created this sort of rework and we're kind of tucking things in different spaces and just absorbing them.
Good. As long as nothing gets dropped.
No, and it's always a concern, safety is number one, and, we're gonna live with this for a while. There's certainly other areas that we haven't backfilled, we have tons of positions that we're not backfilling, and so a lot of the work will be to, we're kind of waiting to exhale a little bit here, and I feel, to see where all this lands, get through this process, determine our budget, and then this summer will be to really sit back and say, this is what we've done, now how do we move forward and open up the school year and make sure that everything that needs to happen happens. So there's a lot of work ahead with that, but safety is number one. So.
And I'd like to call your attention to the last 3 items on the schedule, which are basically salary items. So they're not one-time spending. And again, we have to be aware of the criticism that we took relative to the ESSER monies in applying salaries to one-time monies. We're again doing a similar thing with a little bit more understanding as to us being able to support it in the future. Karen, from saying things that are wrong, just let me know. But the 3 items that we have on the bottom, best case scenario, we feel we may be able to compensate for that money next year in other ways to come in to replace, to add to the recurring salaries. In the event it doesn't, then I asked Kara the question, the people that were hired, and I think she said the last 2 buckets or whatever, they were informed that there may be a possibility that the job doesn't exist in the following year. So people took the positions with an understanding as to what's happened. The most critical salary we need is the one above it, and that we feel, worst case scenario, could pretty much be absorbed in the overall scheme of our budgets that we're dealing with. So we're doing something that we're accused before of doing, but I think we're doing it a little bit more prudently with our eyes open as to have an understanding as to how we're going to cope with that differential if it's a worst case scenario.
Right.
So, because I truly feel that's going to be a criticism particularly on the council, they were very, some people were, you know, adamant that we used the one-time funding, we're doing it again. Although in this case here, we'll probably get applause because we saved so many jobs, but after that applause wears down, the very next day, they're going to shoot you in the foot to say that you did the same thing again, so.
So can I ask a question then, Rich, to follow up on that? We're looking at about 3.5 million
Yeah.
Yes.
in positions, is that right? So when we talk about the alliance funding that's gonna be bumped up next year, conceivably, we could be having this conversation again of restructuring those positions, the
Yeah, so-
salaries in the
Right,
alliance.
and so that was a, when we met with the staff that was involved in the original proposed reduction, we were very happy to be able to get back onto a Zoom with that group and say, we had a last minute Hail Mary here with some funding, but please know that, we're right back in the same position next year. And so I think people are well aware that the positions that were on the block this year, that will be the same ones that will likely be on the block again next year. So at least there's some information there. And, and unfortunately, it scares, this scares people off, right? So if that was you and you heard that information, you're likely out there right now looking for a different job. You're giving yourself the grace of the year to find something different. So, that's a sad thing, but at the same time, like, we will likely not be backfilling some positions if they, folks do that. So, it is what it is. It's the enrollment, those are numbers that somehow, some way, we'll have to cut other things, but to preserve the classroom teacher in front of the students, and to make sure that the supervision is adequate is really important. So, by funding some of that now, it helps to take the bite out of the funding for 25, 26. So, if we hadn't done some of this, and I feel confident that there are lots of people working on our behalf right now to make some of the funding that would come to us more permanent. So I do feel good about that. We're certainly working very hard, and I'll continue to work hard on that front as well. So, and getting creative. One of the ways too, when we got this congressional appropriation, and we're starting to plan out, we'll talk about this during the curriculum committee, so a lot of the work is around academy and the programming. I'm happy to use some of the funding there to offset some of the staff that we might have lost, at least for another year or two. So using grants that come in and continually to kind of pursue grants at a rigorous pace to help with the problem until the city can help us catch up to a more sustainable level.
Is there any way we can do a 3 or 5 year projection?
We'll
Yeah,
get there,
yeah,
yes.
We have one, and with this, I think it's out of date now, it's time for another one.
Yeah.
So that's going to be part of the project when the budget's put together to reflect the 167 that will accompany it with the multi-year budget, so we can talk to that. There was 2 other points here. I asked Kara to just be aware of a question indicating the initial difference after we presented the 181 and got the appropriation is the publicity we got of the 100 people being laid off, etc. So maybe at some point you can indicate some sort of a breakdown of pink slips as to how many people were in the budget that were just positioned, so that there's an understanding.
Yeah, and just, for the record, we had about 50 of the positions that we closed that were either resignations or retirements or open positions. And there was another 48 that were actual reductions, so people that were in positions that were reduced, and then they were able to take other open positions in the district. So we have only 2 true layoffs out of all of those positions. So it's 50 positions closed, 48 people in other positions reduced, and only two true layoffs.
I think that's an important recap, as well as the other question they asked you to do is, as you did with the ad hoc, that very last page, so they gave you the Academy Award where it was the impact. My feeling is that this is something that it's more complicated, and the most complicated reconciliation, if there's a difference or reconciliation between appropriation and a board budget. But people have to understand that this is going to impact education, all right? We cannot continue to go on and have people the next day say, oh, they made it work, we gave them this money, and whatever their thoughts are, and, it's going to be back to normal, we're going to get great scores, etc. I think there has to be a reality check, Dr. Casimira, that with these reductions, there's going to be some sort of impact on the quality of education, and that I look at it is that we use this year as a building block, saying that, this is it. We are down to the foundation, and even below the foundation. And from here, we've got to now restore, and that's where the 3-year or multi-year budget come in. We then have to show that this is what we're looking to project to move this district ahead in the future, and then advocate for those funds. We can no longer tolerate the differential between what we come up with and what the appropriations are. So that's a whole different concept. And I think your explanation to the public and making them aware as to what's going to happen, I think gives them a reality check.
I would agree, and I also believe that the multi-year budget helps to tell that story. It gives people plenty of notice to help prepare for this. It's really about creating the transparency around what the needs are, so that we're not in an April, May, holy cow situation every year where that thought process, the way that capital money is used, the way that the city is interpreting the fundings that they're receiving and identifying the projects where that money may go to. So if we're not included in that mix because there's not a transparency around the need, and that we have to continue to keep the buzz in the ear to let folks know what it is that we need. Because I do think I saw a lot of eyes opened up, I think, in this last attempt to communicate our story, and I just think it's a matter of transparency and communication. So we can certainly do that. I also feel good that the member of one of the ad hoc committees reached out to begin to set up to have a small group to start to meet, to articulate what is it that you're going to need in the next year or two. So I feel good about that. That hasn't necessarily happened in the past. So yeah, I think it's really about the communication piece, telling the story, and having some solid numbers for people to work with that they can.
And I think
rely
the
on.
dialogue, like you said, very, very quickly, as soon as we redo this at the board meeting, as quickly after is to with the council, so that we start the flow of information currently and not waiting for the last, the 11th hour. We cannot continue to do things in April and then reinvent the wheel. So this presentation should be made to whomever committees or whatever body they want, so that we can follow up and tell them basically what we've done as well as what the impact is, and then work together to move ahead as basically a team.
I think they were very clear at last year that they, two councilmen plus another, they're very willing to work with this administration, and the suggestion was we're gonna look at starting talking about the budget in September, and that was a commitment that came from Ben Shanice and a couple of them. So I think they're willing to work good. My two questions I need so much some answers to, I appreciate it, and I can wait. If we only have two layoffs of all this that we have been going through the last couple of weeks, how many open positions? And are they certified open positions?
We have quite a few. So that was 50 positions that we closed are kind of here in this bucket, but then there's a whole other list of open positions. So we're getting a lot of resignations right now.
Okay.
Normally we get them this time of year, retirements, resignations. I think we'll probably see a few more than we're used to seeing as a result. I mean, this scares folks off. And so making sure that we continue to fill those open positions over the summer is a priority, so that we're hiring and onboarding and making staff feel connected to our school system immediately when they come to us, so that we can hold them here. So we do have a lot of open positions, and most of those are now posted. There'll be a few more things going up over the next couple of weeks.
Okay, so there's not, right now, there's not a number as far as those openings.
So there's a number.
I will
Kelly.
count them for you.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah,
Now,
yeah,
there's
Kelly would
no
have that
rush.
sheet
You can
open.
send it
Yep.
to me even.
Yep.
And my
If you could use
final
that as a
question is, I
recap,
was
you know,
looking on the, so my final question is, I was looking on this last sheet, I think it's the last sheet.
For the rest of
I think it's page number 6. Okay? As we go all the way down to the bottom, it changed since January 2024. And we have assistant IT director. And I'm sort of gonna know how many people, because this under technology.
Yeah.
How many people are structured under technology? And if we have, not Jackson,
Gina Jackson.
Gina, thank you, I won't call her. It's Gina is the overall director,
Yeah.
and I know Barb works on the technology. How many people are in that group? So now you're gonna bring in another assistant IT director to assist who?
So this is really the position that, I don't know if you remember who Lex was, but he was our network administrator.
Security.
Network security, yes. So when he vacated, he left this for a position, similar position, making 3-4 times more. The position itself was severely not appropriately salaried for the work. So when we went to reapply, when we went to kind of relook at the position again, particularly in light of our large security breach that we had over the summer, we bumped up this position and gave it a title so that it become more attractive, and then added a little more responsibility to it. As far as Barb Savo, Barb's position is, I don't know, what's her latest?
Google specialist.
She's Google specialist, and she has a few others, but she's not a director, she's not an administrator, she's more of a technology specialist, as opposed to a management personnel. Yeah.
I just think it's important too, so Barb tends to focus a lot on our staff, right? So anytime someone's hired, they need credentialing to get in, they need a computer set up, they need access and log into a multitude of platforms. She also runs security checks on our system, those types of things. As we've moved into a very digital world, every single program that we launch has some type of digital component. So when you figure 12,000 students, even if we're doing it at one grade level, right, 1,000 students, they need usernames, they need logins, they need software downloaded. And so we are finding that the student piece, we've been okay to staff the adult piece, even as we've grown, but it's really the student-centered work. We do so much digital platform and learning. Right now we're doing our state assessment, for example. The browser has to be personally downloaded on every single student device before they can take the test. And so those are the types of things, just to give one little example, that that department, I will tell you, is, in my personal opinion, please, way understaffed for the needs of our kids and our adult learners in our district.
So again, you don't, the number of people that's working in that department, that's
Yeah, we could get that to you, and just to clarify, this is not a new person, it's a salary adjustment on the person that left, so that we can hire someone who'd be more willing to stay and take on the responsibilities commensurate with the salary. 5 people?
I think so.
Yeah, I think we only have 5 people in IT outside of the tech.
Outside the techs in the building.
Techs in the building.
And I think my last comment, and I know it's for me,
Yeah.
and I know I've been around a long time, but I think for us to, as board members, the information that we receive when we come to committee meetings, and just like this information, when we sit and talk and we decide that we want to support the superintendent budget, we don't understand the pieces, all the pieces that go into it, and the job that people do to make and build those positions. And sometimes that get caught up into our attitudes and how we think and feel about people. So I just want to put that.
Yeah.
I think the questions are helpful to help describe, like, you know, because we live in it, so sometimes we just assume, right, that people know and understand. I did count out, Ms. Cooper, the openings. We currently have 52 certified teacher openings in the district. Now, I'm sure as I say that, it will just and change as hiring reports are coming in, resignations are coming in, but around the low 50 is a good guesstimate right now.
Are there any other questions that board members would have? Just a question before I call for motion to recommend it to the full board. When we present this to the full board, I had asked them to come tonight so that we save time and have more conversation and more time to do it. So unfortunately, it didn't work out. At the board meeting, are we going to reiterate all this in detail again? I just leave it up to you for the presentation as to.
We could certainly walk through it again, and I think it's probably needed. And this is
Yeah,
a big,
because, you
big
know,
budget year. There's been a lot of pressure on this, so I think it's important everybody understands it.
I think it'd be important to, at least to go through it, because we could just indicate briefly a summary of the minutes and stuff like that, but this is too complicated, and I said it's really a piece of art, and I think people have to understand it and appreciate the work that went into it, and so
It's also important for all of our conversations going forward.
Yeah, right.
If folks don't understand the foundation this year,
Right.
when we have this conversation again next year, it's just gonna be a repeat of the same.
Sometimes that's not a fact of reality, though.
We do it now.
Teresa.
One question. This is a favor. When you get big spreadsheets like this, can you do it with the grid? I have a hard time pulling across.
Yes,
Thank you.
me too.
Thank you.
With that,
It's getting harder and harder.
I'll ask to make a motion that the finance committee agreed to recommend this to the full board at the next meeting
So-
for adoption.
I'll second.
Do you want this?
I'm
Teresa
gonna check it out. Thank you.
approved, Kate second, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. And with that, my
Thank
final
you.
statement would be great job, and I thank you very much for your
Yes.
time and your presentation. It was extremely coherent and understandable, put it that way. That it was just, for such a complex, I remember, when we first started, it gave me a headache, to see.
Oh, we have a headache, so.
But it just boiled down to something that is, and I think the important thing we tried to do was to keep things in the same format that we originally were presented, so that the original budget of the 181 million, had this chart with the, what I call it, the storyline on it. And I said, continue that with the reduction so that there's a continuity. I've always felt that in the past, we've changed the formats, and then it led to a lot of confusion and perhaps disinterest. So I think we're doing a whole lot better to improve ourselves. I want to say thank you all. Appreciate your time and your work.
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Yes. Well,